How does a quiet old man lying under an oxygen mask turn a hospital room into a courtroom? How did I go from being the weak patient my son thought he could pressure to the person who calmly cut him off from everything he expected to inherit? Why did I pretend to be unconscious when he leaned over my bed and said this was my last chance? Before we dive deeper into the story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Gordon Kent, and when this all started, I was sure my heart was the main problem. I was wrong. The real problem was my son standing at the side of my hospital bed, looking at me as if I was already gone and he was only waiting for the papers to catch up. The first thing I remember clearly is the sound of air moving through the plastic mask on my face. It felt like someone else was breathing for me. My chest hurt. My arms felt heavy. A monitor beat out a slow rhythm beside me. My eyes were open, but everything was blurry at the edges. I saw the soft green light on the machine, the thin clear tube, the blue curtain around my bed. I tried to move my hand. It took effort, like lifting a stone underwater. A warm hand wrapped around my fingers, and a woman's voice told me that I was in the intensive care unit. The woman explained that I had a serious heart and lung incident, that I had been very lucky, that I was stable now, but weak. She told me not to try to talk too much. Her badge said Angela. Behind her shoulder, I saw my son, Brandon. He stood with his arms folded, wearing a neat shirt and a watch that looked new. His eyes were on the machines, not on me. Next to him, on one of the visitor chairs, his fiancée, Jenna, sat with her legs crossed. She kept her phone in her hand, screen lighting up every few seconds. The doctor, Dr. Singh, came in while Angela checked my blood pressure. Dr. Singh told me in a calm voice that my heart had been under stress for a long time, that this episode had been strong, that some people in my condition did not wake up at all. He said it as gently as he could, but the meaning was clear. I nodded slowly. I wanted to ask about long-term chances, but the words stuck in my throat. Before I could try again, Brandon stepped closer to the doctor. My son spoke quickly, like he was afraid someone would cut him off. He asked how long I would be in intensive care. He asked how much this kind of room cost. He asked what the point was of the most expensive treatment if the result would be a weak old man who might never go home. He did not look at me when he said any of this. He spoke as if I was a broken car and he was talking to a repair shop. I saw Angela's face tighten for a second, then smooth out again. Dr. Singh answered in the polite way professionals use when they are careful. He explained that it was too early to talk about any long-term limits, that they would know more after a few days, that the main priority right now was keeping my condition stable. He added that I was still able to make my own decisions about care. Brandon did not like that answer. I could tell from the way his jaw shifted. He asked if I was really clear in my head after what had happened. He said he had read that older people get confused after events like this. Dr. Singh looked at me and then back at him and said that at the moment I was clear enough to understand questions and give answers. I tried to give a small smile behind the mask. Jenna finally looked up from her phone. She told the doctor that she and Brandon had been talking about planning ahead for a while now, and she asked if there were forms they needed to sign for power over medical and financial decisions. She spoke in a soft, sweet voice, but her eyes were sharp. She did not look at me either. Dr. Singh said that any such papers should be handled by my own legal representative, not through the hospital, and that it was better to wait until I had a chance to talk about them calmly. He wrote something in my chart and left. Angela checked one more line on a monitor, told me to use the call button if I needed anything, and said she would be back in a while. Then it was just the three of us, and the room felt very small. I tried to speak, but the words came out slow and rough. I managed to tell Brandon that I was still here, that I just needed some time to rest, and that we could talk about everything later. He stepped closer to the bed and told me that time was exactly the problem. He said the doctor had just admitted that people in my condition sometimes did not wake up. He said we might not get later. I looked at him. He avoided my eyes again and stared at the machine next to me instead. He said the room was too expensive, that my care was too much, that the company needed clear leadership, that the house and the shares could not just float in the air while I lay there. He told me he had been talking to financial advisors. He told me they all said the same thing. The sooner the estate was simple and in his hands, the better. Jenna nodded beside him like she was a silent echo. She added that it was not just about money. She said the stress of not knowing what would happen was hard on Brandon, on her, on everyone. She said that if I really loved my family, I would make things easy for them and sign what Brandon had brought. Brandon reached into his folder and pulled out a thin stack of papers and a pen. He said they were simple forms. He said it was just a basic power for him to speak for me and a clean will for the company and house. He said everyone expected him to be in charge anyway. He told me he would bring the pen closer if I could not lift my hand. I felt tired and heavy, but my mind was clear. I knew better than to sign papers I had not read, especially in a hospital bed with a mask on my face. I also knew my son well enough to hear the edge in his voice. This was not a kind request. This was pressure. I took a slow breath through the mask. I told him that I wanted my lawyer to see anything before I signed. I said we could schedule a meeting when I was out of intensive care. I tried to keep my tone calm. I did not want a scene in the unit. I knew I did not have the strength for it. He did not move the papers away. He said there might not be a later meeting. He said this might be my last clear day. He leaned in close to my face. I saw every small line of annoyance around his mouth. He said that if I did not sign now, I should not expect the best room, or the best care, or the same support. He said I was putting him in a hard position, and that if I did not take this last chance, he would have to make choices without me. My hand was near the call button. I thought about pressing it, but I did not want Angela to walk in on this and make things worse. Instead, I let my fingers go limp. I let my eyelids droop. I slowed my breathing even more, letting the machine buzz softly beside me. I let my head roll slightly to the side. I pretended to be too weak and tired to follow the conversation. It worked faster than I expected. Brandon stopped speaking to me and started speaking about me. He told Jenna that he knew this would happen. He said I was always stubborn, that I always wanted things done my way even when my way was outdated. He said I would probably hold on to the house until my last breath if he let me. He said maybe there were other ways to get what they needed. Jenna asked in a low voice what he meant. I heard the chair creak as she leaned closer. Brandon said he had already talked to a specialist about moving me to a cheaper care facility later, once things were more clear. He said that without my signature it might take longer, but it was still possible to get control, especially if there was any sign that I was not thinking clearly. Listening to my own son talk this way, while he stood over my bed and thought I was unaware, hurt in a way my chest pain did not. The physical hurt was sharp but simple. This was a slow sting that settled in my stomach. He went on. He told Jenna that they could sell the house after everything was over and pay off their loans. He said they could bring in new managers at the company, people who would listen to him. He said he was tired of waiting for the old guard to let go. He said this episode was a sign that it was time for a new era. I kept my face slack. I let my eyes stay half closed. Inside, something very old and quiet in me shifted. Up to that moment, I had been focused on staying alive, on breathing, on the simple fact that my heart was still beating. As I listened to Brandon lay out his future without me while I was still right there, that focus widened. I did not feel rage. I felt a clear, cold line form in my mind. Angela came back into the room with a small tray. She stopped when she saw Brandon standing very close to the bed, the folder open on the side table. She asked softly if everything was all right. Brandon closed the folder quickly and said that we were just talking. He said I was tired and not very responsive. He said he would come back later. She looked at my face. For a moment, I thought she might see that my eyes were not as empty as I tried to make them. Then she looked at the papers, then at him. She said in a neutral tone that he should not put anything on the side table where the nurses needed to work. She asked him to move the folder to the chair. He did, a little too fast. Brandon told her he would be back in the evening, that he hoped by then I would be more reasonable. Then he patted my hand with 2 quick taps, more on the plastic rail than on my skin, and walked out with Jenna beside him. I heard the door close. The room felt larger again. Angela adjusted my mask and checked the monitor. She spoke quietly, saying that my numbers were holding steady and that I had done well. Then, in a voice that was even softer, she added that family visits could be stressful, and that if any conversations about money or documents made me uncomfortable, I should tell her or the social worker. She said the hospital took that kind of thing seriously. I opened my eyes fully and met hers. I did not say much. I only told her that my son was worried about the future and that he could be very intense when he was under stress. It was the closest I could come, in that moment, to describing what had just happened. Angela gave a small nod. She said she would note that I preferred to speak to my own legal advisor about any papers. When she left, the room became quiet except for the constant mechanical noises and my own slower breathing. I stared at the ceiling and let the last half hour replay in my head, piece by piece. Brandon's tone, Jenna's careful support, the way they spoke when they thought I was not aware. I thought about the long years of work that had built the company. I thought about the house, every wall chosen by hand. I thought about the careful plans Renee and I had made years ago, plans I had almost forgotten. I felt the weight of the oxygen mask on my face and the weight of something else in my chest. A simple, steady decision that this would not end the way my son expected. When Angela left me alone again, I kept thinking about that thin folder my son had carried in. The way his hand rested on it told me it was not something new. He had planned this before my heart episode. That thought did something strange inside me. It pulled me back through the years, step by step, to see how we reached this point. I met my late wife when we were both young and hopeful. We did not have much, but we had a small shop and big plans. We worked side by side in that shop for years. I handled the supply chains and the deals. She handled the customers and knew every regular by name. When our son was born, we told each other that all this work was for him. We imagined giving him a solid base and a choice-filled life. When Brandon was small, he used to sit on the counter of that shop, swinging his feet and asking questions about everything. He asked why the same hammer could cost different amounts. He asked why we gave extra time to some customers and not others. Back then, he was curious in a way that warmed my heart. I thought those questions meant he would grow into someone careful and thoughtful. As the years passed, the shop grew into a chain of hardware supply stores. I drove long distances, met more suppliers, dealt with banks, learned to read contracts. My wife kept the home steady and raised our son with gentle rules. I missed some school events. I came home late on some nights. I told myself that each missed moment was a trade for a better future for him. I did not see the small gaps that started to form in our family story. By the time Brandon was in high school, we were no longer the small shop family. We had a company with trucks and a warehouse. At home, we had a larger house with more rooms than 3 people needed. My wife stayed busy with local groups and charity events. Brandon had new friends. He cared more about what they thought than about the old shop where it had all started. I remember one evening at the kitchen table. I had just come back from a hard meeting with a supplier. I tried to explain to Brandon how a line in a contract could control a whole deal. I told him that power did not always look exciting. Sometimes it looked like a sentence buried on page 6. He listened for a minute, then shrugged and changed the topic to his friend's plans for the weekend. I laughed it off and told myself he was just a teenager. Maya, my niece, came into our life more around that time. Her mother, my sister, went through a hard personal situation and needed help. Maya spent many weekends at our house. She was a quiet child, always with a book or a small notebook in her hand. While Brandon rolled his eyes at my stories about contracts, Maya asked gentle questions and took notes. She sat with me at the home office desk while I balanced accounts. She liked numbers in a way that reminded me of myself. When Brandon went off to college, I hoped the time away would make him more serious. He chose a program that sounded impressive, but did not demand too much effort. He called home when he needed money or when something broke with his car. When he came home for holidays, he acted like a guest and an owner at the same time. He would walk into the living room and talk about how he would redo it one day. He would ask when I planned to retire and hand the company fully to him. My wife and I would laugh in a kind way and tell him that the company did not work like that. We explained that there was a board, that there were managers, that there were contracts. He always brushed that aside. He said that when I was done, people would listen to him because he was the future. It sounded like a joke at first, but each year there was a bit more steel under the words. After my wife passed, the house became quieter. Brandon came home less often. Maya, on the other hand, came more. She brought food, helped me with small repairs, and sat in the home office with me to go through mail and documents. She would stay until late with the accounts, and then we would share simple meals in the kitchen. She listened when I spoke about my long days on the road, my past mistakes, and my hopes for the future of the company. It was during one of those evenings that I first sat down with Renee, my lawyer, to discuss estate plans. We met in her law firm conference room. The room had clean lines and shelves of files that smelled faintly of paper and ink. She asked careful questions about my assets, my goals, and my relationships. I told her I wanted things to be fair, to protect the company, and to support family who showed care and responsibility. Renee suggested that I use a trust rather than a simple will. She explained that a trust could carry conditions. She used simple words, but I understood that she was talking about tying behavior and responsibility to access. She said that if I worried about future pressure or unkind treatment near the end of my life, we could write language that discouraged that. She never used harsh terms. She simply spoke of respect, conduct, and care. At the time, it felt almost silly. I still saw my son as a bit spoiled but harmless. I told her I did not think he would ever push me in a way that cruel. She replied that it was best to have such protections and never need them than to need them and not have them. Maya sat in the corner of the room, listening. She said nothing, but I saw her eyes move from me to Renee and back, thoughtful and steady. We signed papers. We made notes. We set up a trust. I agreed to clauses that sounded like distant, unlikely possibilities. One clause said that if any heir publicly disrespected or tried to rush me into decisions around my care or estate, There would be consequences. Another clause gave room for assets to shift to someone else, perhaps Maya or a charitable structure, if such conduct was proven in a clear way. The plan went into a folder and then into a safety box. Life went on. The company grew. Brandon returned from college and moved into a role at the company, helped by my introduction. I placed him in a middle management position. In meetings, I presented him as the next generation. I wanted to give him chances I never had. The board members nodded politely. Some of them gave me small looks later that I did not want to read. Brandon liked the title and the attention. He liked using my last name and the word successor in the same sentence. He liked to tell vendors that he would be running things soon. He liked to say that he would cut old habits and bring in new ideas. He did not like the slow parts, reading long reports, listening to quiet older managers, sitting through meetings about safety rules. That was when he sighed and checked his phone under the table. I remember a specific board meeting in the company's main conference room. It was supposed to be a calm update about our year. I spoke about steady growth, not dramatic, but stable. When I paused, Brandon jumped in. He spoke in a fast, confident tone about a plan to close 2 branches and open a big new store in a flashy location. He said the old model was over. He said it was time for strong moves. He implied, without saying it directly, that my style was holding us back. Some of the younger managers smiled and nodded. Some of the older ones looked down at their papers. I felt a small sting, but I chose not to correct him in front of everyone. After the meeting, I told him privately in my office that we could not bet the company on one large project like that. I tried to explain the risk. He listened with half of his attention and told me that I was too careful and that people like him moved the world forward. I told myself again that youth needed time. At home, the pattern continued. Brandon would walk through the house and make casual comments about what he would change when it was his. He would point at the dining room and say he would knock down a wall. He would pat the railing on the stairs and say he would tear it out for something more modern. The words were casual, but the way he spoke made it sound as if I was already gone and he was just waiting for the keys. When he brought Jenna into the family, I hoped a stable partner might soften him. Instead, Jenna often encouraged his complaints. In the living room, she would listen while he talked about how hard it was to wait for his turn. She would say that someone like him needed room to lead. She would look around the house with the eyes of someone measuring spaces in her head. She was polite to me, but there was a distance in her tone, like I was a temporary landlord, not a father-in-law to be. During holidays, when the family gathered at the house, the contrast between Brandon and Maya became sharp. Maya arrived early, helped set the table, checked on me, and asked simple questions about my health and the company. Brandon and Jenna came later, made a bright entrance, and quickly steered conversation toward their plans, their trips, their future wedding. When I tried to share stories from the early days of the business, they listened for a minute, then steered the talk back to their concerns. I saw all this, and I did what many parents do. I told myself that time and responsibility would mature my son. I told myself that once he had more weight on his shoulders, he would grow into the role. I gave him more chances at the company. I let him lead small projects and some negotiations. Each time, he focused on the visible part, the presentation, the headline. He did not always care about the fine print or the quiet relationships that held our network together. When I ended up in the hospital, all of this history sat in the back of my mind like layers of dust on old shelves. Lying under the oxygen mask, listening to the machine, I brushed through those layers and saw the whole picture more clearly. The pattern of small comments about my age, the jokes about the house, the way he spoke over me in meetings, the way he talked in the family lounge now as if my bed was no more than a waiting room for his future. I realized that nothing in his behavior at my bedside was new. It was simply louder, sharper, and more urgent because he felt time pressing on him. The difference was that now there was proof, witnesses, and policies. Suddenly, those careful clauses Renee had proposed years ago did not feel silly anymore. They felt like the one quiet tool I still had, hidden in plain sight all this time, waiting for a moment like this. The next morning, light from the small window fell across the floor in a thin line. I woke to the sound of carts in the hallway and the low murmur of voices. My chest still felt heavy, but the fog in my head had lifted a little. I could think in straight lines again. Angela came in with her usual calm steps. She checked my blood pressure and noted the numbers. Her movements were steady, almost soothing. When she finished, she paused instead of leaving right away. She looked at me for a long second, then said that the hospital social worker wanted to speak with me later in the day, if I felt up to it. She explained that staff sometimes called the social worker when they saw family stress around serious illness. She did not mention Brandon's name, but she did not need to. I understood. I told her slowly that I was willing to talk. She nodded and said she would arrange a time. Before she left, she added that if anyone brought papers for me to sign, I could ask to have staff present or to wait for my own legal advisor. Her tone was gentle, but the meaning was firm. Later that morning, the door opened again, and Brandon walked in with Jenna behind him. He wore a fresh shirt, his hair was carefully styled, he carried the same folder, but now it looked thicker, with a band around it. Jenna's phone was in her hand as usual. She smiled at me with a bright, careful expression, as if we were at a polite gathering instead of in an intensive care unit. Brandon asked how I felt in a voice that sounded almost normal. I said I was tired, but clearer. I thanked him for coming. He nodded once, then moved closer to the bed. He said he had spoken with a legal advisor. He said the forms were ready now in proper shape. He said the sooner we signed, the better for everyone. He set the folder down on the tray table and pulled out a pen. He told me, in an even tone, that there was a document granting him full authority over medical and financial matters. He said there was also a new will that matched reality, as he called it. He explained that this version removed complicated structures and gave him direct control of the house and company shares. He said we did not need complicated trusts or outside people involved. I listened without moving my hand. I could feel the oxygen mask covering half my face, and it gave me an excuse to remain silent for a moment. He went on. He said the cost of my stay here was very high. He said it was not smart to keep funding the best room and the most advanced care if there was no clear plan for paying for it. He reminded me that he was the one who would deal with everything after, so I should make it easy now. Jenna nodded to each point like a silent witness. She said that families who delayed these choices often ended up in conflict later. She said they were trying to avoid that. She told me that signing now would be an act of kindness toward them. She called it a way of protecting them from chaos. I asked in a hoarse voice whether my own lawyer had seen these forms. Brandon's mouth tightened. He said that my lawyer was slow and old-fashioned. He said there was no need to bring in more people. He added that if I insisted, we might miss the window while I was still, in his words, fully present. His tone made it clear what he thought would happen soon. I felt something inside me settle, like a stone dropping to the bottom of a lake. I told him I would not sign anything without my own legal advisor. I said it clearly and slowly, so there could be no doubt. I added that I was still able to think and decide. I reminded him that Dr. Singh had said so in front of him. Brandon's voice changed. The smooth surface cracked. He said that doctors talked that way because they were afraid of legal trouble. He said the staff did not see how tired I really was. He leaned forward and spoke in a lower tone. He said he could not and would not keep paying for the very best care if I insisted on making everything harder. He implied that there were cheaper paths for my treatment. He said he would have to consider them if I continued to resist. He did not spell out every detail. He did not need to. The meaning was clear enough. At that moment, Angela appeared at the doorway. She froze for half a second when she saw the open folder, the pen in Brandon's hand, and my face turned toward him. Then she entered with a professional smile and said she needed to check my lines. Brandon stepped back, annoyed by the interruption. Angela looked at the papers on the tray table. She asked in a neutral voice whether these were medical forms provided by the hospital. Brandon said no, they were something between me and him. She nodded and said that in that case, they should not be placed on equipment surfaces. She asked him to move them to the chair. He did so, but there was tension in his movements. Angela checked my pulse and asked how I was feeling. I looked at her and said, clearly, that I did not wish to sign any outside documents at this time. I said I wanted to talk with my own legal advisor before making any changes. She met my eyes and said she understood. Then she turned to Brandon and said it was important that I not feel pressured while in intensive care. Brandon tried to smile and said he was not pressuring anyone, just helping. His voice did not match his words. Angela kept her tone calm as she reminded him that the social worker would be meeting with me later and that he was welcome to speak with the social worker as well if he had concerns. The way she said it made it clear that she already had concerns of her own. After she left, Brandon's face was tight. He told me that involving hospital staff in private family matters was unwise. He said it made me look confused. He said it might raise questions about my ability to handle decisions. He added that he had only been trying to avoid that kind of trouble. I answered that I did not involve anyone. Staff saw what they saw. I simply told Angela my choice about the documents. I reminded him again that I was not helpless, and that I had rights as a patient and as the owner of my own estate. My voice was weak, but I kept it steady. Jenna stepped in then, placing her hand on his arm. She spoke in a gentle tone to him, not to me. She said that maybe they should give me some space and return later. She suggested they talk to someone about how to proceed if I continued to refuse. She said there were ways to move things along through other channels. They left a few minutes later, taking the folder with them. When the door closed, I let out a long breath I had not realized I was holding. My heart monitor beeped a little faster, and I focused on slowing it down. I knew I had just crossed a line of my own. I had refused my son directly in front of staff. There was no going back to the old pattern of silence and excuses. An hour later, Angela returned and asked if I was ready to speak with the social worker. I said yes. She helped adjust my bed so I could sit a little more upright. After a few minutes, a man in a plain shirt and an identification card came in. He introduced himself as Mr. Ellison, the hospital social worker. His voice was calm and low, the kind used when people are already under strain. He explained that his role was to support patients and families, especially when there were hard decisions to make. He said that staff sometimes asked him to check in when they noticed tension or when family members spoke about money and control around a seriously ill patient. He did not describe any specific scene, but I could guess which ones he meant. He asked if I felt pressured to sign anything. He asked if I felt safe making my own choices. He said I did not need to answer quickly and that he could return later if I was tired. I looked at him and decided not to delay. I told him slowly that my son had brought documents for me to sign. I said that I had asked for my own lawyer to review them. I said that my son did not like that answer and had spoken more than once about the cost of my care and the need to simplify matters. I chose my words carefully. I did not insult my son. I did not question his feelings. I simply described what he had said and done. Mr. Ellison listened without interrupting. He asked a few follow-up questions. Whether I had a lawyer, whether I felt clear enough to work with that lawyer, whether I wanted the hospital to note my wish to include that lawyer in any planning. I answered yes to each. He explained that the hospital had a duty to protect patients from pressure in these situations. He said he could note in my record that I did not wish to sign outside documents in the unit and that staff should be present during any future discussions about legal or financial matters. He also said that, if necessary, he could arrange for a neutral witness to be present when I spoke with my own lawyer by phone or in person. His words did something in me. They reminded me that I was not as helpless as I felt lying there under tubes and wires. Institutions might move slowly, but when they moved in the right direction, they could be strong. After he left, I rested. The day felt longer than it was. In the early evening, Brandon returned alone. His steps were quick and sharp on the floor. He stood by the bed and told me in a tight voice that he had heard about my talk with the social worker. He said I was making him look like a selfish relative in front of staff. He said I had twisted his intentions. He insisted he only wanted what was best. I let him speak. Then I told him calmly that I had only answered questions truthfully. I repeated that I wanted my own legal advisor involved. I said that if his intentions were as good as he claimed, then there was no reason to fear another professional set of eyes on the documents. He did not like that. He shook his head and said that this was exactly the kind of slow, cautious thinking that had kept the company from reaching its full potential. He hinted again at changing the level of my care if things became unsustainable. He used careful language, but the edge under it was sharp. Angela, passing by, heard enough to step in. She reminded him that treatment levels were based on medical judgment, not on private threats. She said it in a calm tone, but each word landed with weight. Brandon went quiet, then left without another word. When the room was still again, I stared at the ceiling and felt the last of my old excuses for him crumble. The pattern was too clear. This was not fear talking. This was entitlement. He saw my house, my company, my years of work as a pile of pieces he had a right to rearrange as he wished. I turned my head slowly toward the small table where the room phone sat. My hand shook as I reached for the call button. When Angela came, I asked if she could place the phone closer and help me dial a number from my memory. She did, supporting the receiver near my ear while I pressed the buttons with a clumsy finger. Renee's office line rang. Her assistant answered. I told her my name and said I was in the hospital after a serious heart and lung event. I said I needed to speak with Renee about the protection plan we had built years ago, the one involving respect and conduct. I said that my son was pressing hard to change things and that I did not wish to do so. My voice cracked, but the message was clear. The assistant spoke in a quick, efficient tone. She said Renee was in a meeting but would receive the message as urgent. She confirmed the hospital name and my room. She told me to focus on resting and said they would be in touch very soon. When the call ended, I let my head sink back onto the pillow. The oxygen machine hummed beside me. My body felt weak and sore, but my mind felt almost lighter. For the first time since I woke in that room, I was not only reacting, I was acting in my own quiet way. I had drawn a line, not with raised voices, but with a phone call and a memory of ink on paper from years ago. The call from Renee's office came early the next day. Angela helped lift the receiver to my ear again and pressed the speaker button so I would not have to hold it. Renee's voice came through, calm and steady, the same voice I had heard in her conference room years before. She first asked about my health. She said she had received the message from her assistant and wanted to confirm the details. I told her about the heart and lung episode as clearly as I could. Then I told her about Brandon at my bedside, the folder, the talk about costs, the pressure to sign new documents without her review. I described how he leaned over the oxygen machine and said this might be my last clear chance. I told her about his comments in the family lounge that staff had overheard. Renee listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said in a quiet tone that she was glad I had reached out. She said she remembered the trust we had set up and the special language we had included. She told me she would pull the file that morning and go through every line again. She also said that from what I had just described, it sounded like some of the conditions we had once discussed might now be relevant. She explained that for those protections to work, we would need clear proof of conduct. Notes, messages, maybe statements from witnesses. She told me that this was not about punishing a child for one rude moment. It was about a pattern of pressure and public disrespect around serious illness. She asked if I felt strong enough for her to come to the hospital later in the week to speak with me in person. I told her that I did. My voice shook a little, but I was sure. Angela stood near the bed, pretending to adjust a line while she listened carefully. When the call ended, she said she would note in my chart that my own lawyer was expected and that staff should help with access. Later that morning, I imagined Renee in her office, walking to a file cabinet, pulling out a folder with my name on it. I pictured her reading through pages we had signed when my wife was still alive, words I had not thought about in detail for a long time. While I lay under hospital lights, those words were quietly waking up again in a room across town. A few hours passed. I dozed and woke in cycles. Around midday, Maya arrived. She came in with soft steps, carrying a small bag with a sweater and some fruit. Her face looked tired, but her eyes were clear. She gently touched my arm and asked how I felt. I told her I was weak, but still thinking clearly. She gave a small smile and said that sounded like me. She told me that Renee had called her. She said Renee had asked to meet her at a cafe near the hospital. Maya said she had gone there that morning. In the cafe, over simple coffee, Renee had asked her about my relationship with Brandon in recent years, both at home and at the company. Maya said she had answered honestly. She told me she had described how Brandon spoke about the house as if it was already his, how he joked about knocking down walls and changing everything. She told me she had told Renee about company meetings where Brandon dismissed my careful plans as old-fashioned. She also said she had mentioned the loud way Brandon now talked in the family lounge about ending my stay in the expensive room as soon as possible. Then Maya said something that made my chest tighten in a new way. She told me she had kept old messages from Brandon on her phone. Some were from years ago, when he had complained to her that I was too slow to pass everything to him. Others were newer, where he spoke about expecting to get the house and shares sooner rather than later if my health declined. She said she had shown some of these messages to Renee at the cafe. She told me that Renee had taken notes and asked permission to copy a few of the messages for the file. Maya said she had agreed. She said she had not wanted to betray family, but it was clear to her now that honesty was the only way to protect me and the company. She lowered her eyes when she said that. I told her that truth was not betrayal. I told her that she was doing what a real family member did. While we spoke, Angela came in and greeted Maya by name. They had seen each other before, when Maya visited earlier in my stay. Angela checked my pulse and mentioned that the social worker, Mr. Ellison, would be updating my record to reflect my wish to involve my own lawyer. She said that any time Brandon wanted to discuss finances or documents at the bedside, staff would try to be present. Angela also told us, in a careful tone, that some staff on the floor had heard Brandon in the family lounge the day before. She said he had spoken quite loudly about my care costing too much and about planning changes at the company once his turn came. She did not use his exact words, but I could hear the meaning. She said one of the clerks had been close enough to hear every detail and had mentioned it to her. Mr. Ellison visited that afternoon. He updated me on what he was doing. He said he had placed a note in my chart stating that I preferred to wait for my own legal advisor before signing any outside documents. He also said he was recording that staff had heard repeated talk from my son about care costs and control of assets. He explained that this did not mean the hospital was taking sides in a family dispute. It meant the hospital was following its duty to protect patients from pressure. He also told me that, if needed, he could speak to my son directly. He said he could explain hospital policy about end-of-life planning and patient rights. He added that if Brandon wished, he could attend a group meeting where medical staff, social work, and family would all sit together so there would be fewer chances for misunderstandings. His tone was balanced, but I could tell he had already decided to keep a close watch. That same day, in a different part of town, Renee's assistant walked into the bank where I had kept my safety deposit box for years. I was not there, of course, but later Renee described it over the phone. The assistant took my key, showed the written authorization, and signed the log. She opened the metal box, took out a thick envelope with the trust documents and share certificates, and sealed them into a new folder for the law firm. A simple, quiet chain of steps, all on record, all within the rules. Evening came, and with it Brandon and Jenna. This time they did not come straight to my room. I heard about their words in the family lounge from Maya later, who had stayed near the door with a cup of tea. Brandon, feeling safer away from my bed, spoke freely. He complained that the hospital was interfering in family matters. He said staff were treating him like a problem instead of a helpful son. He said it was unfair that I was still described as clear and able to decide. He went on to talk about the company. He told a cousin that once things were settled, he would relocate the headquarters, remove some longtime managers, and bring in his own team. He spoke about my office as if it were just another space to be emptied and redesigned. He even joked that he would finally throw out my old chair and buy something modern. To him, it was a casual remark. To those who cared about me, it was another sign. One of the younger relatives, who had his phone in his hand as usual, later admitted to Maya that he had recorded part of Brandon's speech without thinking much about it. He had sent it to someone with a comment about how tense the family situation was. When Maya heard this, she quietly asked him to keep that clip and not delete it. She told him it might matter more than he knew. When Maya came back to my room and told me all this, I felt both sadness and a strange relief. Sadness, because it hurt to hear how openly my son spoke of life after me, as if I were already gone. Relief, because each careless sentence was now leaving footprints. He was no longer just thinking these things in private. He was saying them out loud, in shared spaces, with witnesses. The next morning, Renee called again. She said she had the trust file open on her desk. She reminded me of the clauses we had included. One set of clauses tied continued access to the estate to consistent, respectful conduct toward me, especially in public and in matters related to my health. Another set allowed for assets to be redirected to a foundation and to another responsible family member if serious mistreatment or pressure could be shown. She said carefully that from what I had told her, and from what Maya and the staff had now reported, it seemed that the conditions for those clauses were no longer just theoretical. She emphasized that nothing would be done in the dark. Any change would be in full legal form, with clear dates, witnesses, and records. She asked me again if that was what I wanted. Lying there, listening to the steady rhythm of my heart on the monitor, I understood that this was the moment when my quiet memory of ink on paper had to become action. I told her that I did not want to punish my son for every childish remark he had ever made. I said I did want to protect the company, the staff who depended on it, the house that held my late wife's memory, and relatives like Maya who had stood by me. Renee said that this was exactly what the trust had been designed to do. She told me she would meet with me in person soon at the hospital once all the relevant notes, messages, and documents were organized. She said she would bring a notary and any forms that might be needed, but that nothing would be pushed on me. Every decision would be mine, line by line. After the call, Angela stepped in and saw the expression on my face. I must have looked both tired and strangely calm. She asked if everything was all right. I told her that what we had put on paper years ago was now being checked and tested. I added that it seemed I was not as powerless as I had felt the first night when I woke up under the mask. She gave a small nod and said that sometimes the quiet parts of life, the files, the notes, the rules, protect people more than loud promises. Outside my door, I could hear the sounds of the hospital continuing. Carts rolling, someone laughing softly, footsteps passing by. Inside the room, the machines hummed and beeped in their steady pattern. Between those sounds, there was something else now, something that had not been there when I first woke up. The slow, careful movement of systems beginning to turn in my favor. 2 days later, Renee arrived at the hospital in person. She came into my room in a dark suit and flat shoes, carrying a simple leather folder. She looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe the hospital bed made everyone else look small. Her face was calm but focused, the way it had been years ago when we first talked about the trust. Angela checked my blood pressure while Renee stood to one side. When she left us alone, Renee pulled a chair close to the bed so I would not have to strain my neck. She said she had reviewed every page of my old documents. She also said that after our last call, she had spoken again with Maya and gone over some of the messages and stories she had shared. Renee explained, in simple phrases, that the protections we put in place were still valid and strong. She reminded me that we had prepared for the possibility of pressure near the end of my life. She said that the way Brandon was speaking in public about my care and my assets fit that pattern more than either of us had hoped it would. Her voice did not shake or rise. She was not angry, she was precise. She told me that the next step, if I wanted to use those protections, was to sign updated instructions. Those instructions would not tear up everything we had done before. They would adjust it. They would place some things out of Brandon's reach and move other things to structures and people who had shown stable care over the years. She did not list every point. She only said that these adjustments would follow the spirit of what we had agreed on long ago. I listened and thought about my breathing, the machine, the weight in my chest, my son's words in the family lounge. I thought about the house my wife had decorated room by room and the company that carried my name. I thought about the long line of staff who depended on that company for their own homes and families. I asked Renee if there was enough proof for these protections to stand. She said yes. She spoke of staff notes, of the social worker's record, of the messages Maya had saved, of the recording the younger relative had made by accident. She said that none of this was dramatic in itself. Together, it formed a clear picture. An heir speaking openly about ending care early to gain faster control, and about treating my life's work as his personal project before it was his. Renee then told me about the visit she and Maya had planned to my house. She said they would go later that day, with my written permission. They would look through my home office, check for old letters, earlier draft plans, anything that showed my long-standing intentions for the company and the house. She believed that such notes existed because of things I had said in the past. I realized she knew me well. That afternoon, while I lay under warm hospital lights, they walked through my front door. Maya described it to me later. The house was quiet, still carrying the faint smell of the last meal she had cooked there for me before my heart episode. Renee moved slowly, taking in the layout. Maya led her to the home office, the room with the heavy desk and the shelves filled with binders and boxes. They unlocked the desk drawer with the small key I had told Maya about years before, after my wife passed. Inside were folders labeled in my own handwriting. Some held old wills that had been replaced by the trust. Some held letters I had written but never sent, to Brandon, to future board members, to whoever truly carries this forward, as one envelope said. There were also notes about a possible foundation and about protecting longtime employees. Maya told me that she watched as Renee carefully read some of those lines. She did not read them to me word for word, but she said that the letters spoke about valuing character over pure blood ties, about wanting the company to serve more than one person's ambition, about choosing future caretakers based on their actions, not just their names. Listening to her, I could remember writing those sentences at the desk late at night, thinking they were more private reflection than real plan. Renee gathered what she needed and left the rest in place. They locked the drawer again. Before leaving the house, they walked through the kitchen and the living room. Maya said that seeing those rooms through Renee's eyes was strange. To Maya, the house meant memories. To Renee, it was also an asset tied to a story of effort, care, and now conflict. Both views were true. The next day, Renee returned to the hospital with a notary and a slimmer folder. Mr. Ellison joined us for part of the time, not to control anything, but to be a neutral observer that I had made these choices of my own will. Angela checked my oxygen and then stood at the back of the room, arms folded lightly, as if to say she was there if needed but would not intrude. Renee laid out the papers on a portable table beside my bed. She explained each section in plain language. She did not describe every number or name out loud, but she made sure I understood the main directions. Some assets would go into a structure meant to support the company and its staff, guided by a board that did not depend on Brandon alone. Some would be placed with a family member who had shown steady, practical concern, Maya. A smaller part would remain open for a possible grandchild, with clear limits so that no one could use it as a personal toy. We paused often so I could rest and breathe. My signature was not as neat as it once had been. My hand shook a little as I wrote my name at the bottom of each page. Still, the letters were clear enough. The notary watched closely, asking me brief questions to confirm I knew what I was doing. Mr. Ellison noted the time and the conditions. Angela checked the monitor each time my pulse sped up and waited for it to calm again. When the last page was signed, Renee gathered the papers with care and slid them back into her folder. She told me that copies would be filed with the right offices and that certified versions would be kept at her firm and in the bank. She said that as of that moment, the path of my estate was no longer open to quick pressure or simple rewrites. It would take more than a folder at a bedside to undo what we had just done. After they left, I asked Angela to help me to the small chapel on the ground floor. It took effort, and I had to sit in a wheelchair with oxygen, but Dr. Singh gave permission as long as staff stayed close. The hallway felt longer than any road I had driven in my working years. Every bump of the chair made my chest ache. Still, I wanted to see that quiet room. The chapel was small, with soft lighting and simple seats. I rolled in and felt the air change. It was cooler and still. No machines beeped here. A few people sat in silence, each with their own worries. Angela stayed near the door while I looked at the candles and the simple symbols on the wall. I closed my eyes and thought about my wife, about the early days in the small shop, about my son as a boy on the counter asking questions. I did not ask for miracles. I did not bargain. I simply sat with the truth. I loved my son. I did not like the man he had chosen to become. I could not change his choices, but I could refuse to reward them with everything I had. I could protect others who had stood by me. That thought did not feel like revenge. It felt like setting a beam straight in a house that had started to lean. Back in my room later, I dozed. In the evening, Brandon came again. This time his visit was short. He stood near the end of the bed, arms crossed. He asked if I had gone behind his back and signed anything with Renee. His information was faster than I had expected. Someone at the house or in the extended family must have said something, or he had simply guessed. I told him that, as a clear-minded adult, I had every right to speak with my own lawyer. I said I had done so. I did not give details. I did not list clauses or names. I only said that my affairs were now in order according to my long-standing values and plans, not according to pressure from anyone. He called that a mistake. He said I was letting other people turn me against my own child. He said I would regret not trusting him fully at a time like this. I looked at him and answered that trust was not a word. It was a pattern. I reminded him of the way he had spoken about the house and the company as if I no longer existed. I said that those patterns had consequences now. His face went hard. He said that if that was how I felt, then he would simply have to live with the results. The words sounded brave, but there was fear behind them. He turned and left without saying goodbye. Jenna did not come in at all that night. The next morning, Dr. Singh and Mr. Ellison came into my room together. They told me that, given my condition and the ongoing tension around my care and estate, they wanted to hold a formal meeting. It would be a joint session with medical staff, the social worker, and family members. They said these meetings helped everyone hear the same information at the same time and could reduce future conflict. They suggested we use the hospital's family conference room, a larger space near the ward with a long table and glass walls. They said they would invite Brandon and Jenna as well as Maya. They asked if I wanted my lawyer present. I said yes. They said they would also let Angela know, since she had been by my side for many of these discussions. Mr. Ellison asked me if I understood what such a meeting would involve. I said that I did. I said it would mean speaking openly, with witnesses, about my care, my rights, and my choices. I also understood that it would give Renee a place to lay out in a calm way what had already been done. For the first time, Brandon would not be the one setting the scene or choosing who listened. They set the time for the next day. When they left, I sat in silence and let the decision sink in. This was no longer a private struggle at my bedside. It was moving into a room where rules, records, and many eyes would shape what came next. My heart beat a little faster at the thought, but under the nerves there was a steady sense of rightness. I had signed what I needed to sign. I had put the quiet structure of my life in motion. Now I would simply have to sit in that room and speak the truth I had already set down on paper. The next day they wheeled me into the family conference room. The glass walls made it feel both open and trapped at the same time. A long table sat in the middle, with chairs on both sides. Papers were stacked neatly near one end. Brandon and Jenna were already there. Brandon stood near the window, arms folded tight. Jenna sat with her hands around a paper cup, eyes moving between him and the door. Maya sat closer to the middle of the table, hands folded in her lap, shoulders straight but tense. Dr. Singh stood near a screen with a few charts. Mr. Ellison had a notepad in front of him. Angela leaned against the wall, calm but watchful. At the far end, Renee sat with her leather folder closed, her expression unreadable. They parked my chair near the head of the table. The oxygen line hummed softly at my shoulder. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mr. Ellison cleared his throat and said the purpose of the meeting was to make sure everyone heard the same information about my health and my decisions. He added that there had also been concerns about pressure and that this was a chance to clear the air. Dr. Singh went first. He described my condition in simple terms. He said I was fragile but mentally clear. He explained that I could understand choices and express wishes. He said this plainly, looking at each person in turn. Brandon shifted in his seat when he heard that. Then Mr. Ellison spoke. He said staff had reported repeated talk near my room and in the family lounge about the cost of my care and the handling of my assets. He said staff had also witnessed attempts to present documents to me at the bedside. He used careful words, but the meaning was sharp. He said the hospital had a duty to protect patient choice. Brandon said this was all a misunderstanding. He told the room that he had only tried to plan responsibly. He said he was being painted as greedy when he was actually worried. His voice was tight, eyes flashing toward me, then toward the staff. Renee opened her folder. She said that several years ago I had placed the bulk of my assets in a trust with special conditions. She explained that these conditions were meant to protect me and the company from exactly the kind of pressure described. She said they were not new or sudden, but written and signed long before this hospital stay. She went on. She said that based on recent conduct, documented by staff notes, messages, and recordings, those conditions had now been met. She said that as a result, and at my request, the trust and will had been updated. She stated in a clear voice that Brandon was no longer the primary heir or future controller of the company. The room went very still. Renee explained that the company shares were now placed in a structure designed to support its long-term health, guided by people chosen for their experience and stability, not by one person's claim. She said that the house would pass under the care of someone who had consistently acted with practical concern for me and for others. Then she said Maya's name. Brandon stared at her as if he had not heard correctly. He asked if she was saying that his cousin now stood where he expected to stand. Renee answered that his own actions had led to that outcome, and that all of it was grounded in written clauses he had never bothered to ask about. He turned to me and asked how I could do this to him. He spoke of years he had spent at the company, of plans he had made, of promises he believed I had given. His voice rose, then broke a little. Jenna put a hand on his arm, looking around, aware that every person in the room was watching. I told him, as calmly as I could, that I had not done this to him. I said he had done it to himself. I reminded him of the words he had used when he thought I was not listening, the way he had spoken by my bed about cheaper care and faster control, the way he had treated the house and company like prizes waiting on a shelf. I said I had given him many chances over the years to show care instead of only hunger for control. I said that in the end, I had chosen to protect the people and work I loved with the tools I had, contracts, clauses, and my signature. I told him this was my last big choice, and I had made it while I was still clear. He tried to argue with Renee, with Dr. Singh, with Mr. Ellison. Each answered the same way. The documents were valid, the records were clear, my capacity was confirmed. Nothing in this room would undo what had already been signed and filed. At last, his words ran out. He sat back in his chair, staring at the table, knuckles white. Jenna looked down, suddenly very quiet. Maya's eyes were wet, but her hands were steady. Renee closed her folder. Angela moved behind my chair. The meeting ended. As they wheeled me out, I passed my son. He did not look up. The only sound in that bright room was the soft shuffle of papers that no longer belonged to him.